In this video, we'll be talking about identifying outliers. What is an outlier? An outlier is an unusually high or low value. It is a data point, an observation that deviates significantly from the others. Why are there outliers? Why could there be outliers in your data set? They could be mistakes made during the data collection process, during the data entry process, or maybe they are not mistakes. Maybe they are very interesting data points that form part of the natural variance of your data set. But regardless of how they come to be in your data set, it is very important to identify them before you begin an analysis because their presence will affect the average and they will affect the outcome of your model, of a model you build based on something like logistic regression or linear regression. So very important to identify them before your analysis and to decide how to handle them. So how do you identify outliers? Well, if the underlying distribution of your data follows an approximately normal distribution, you could say that a value that is greater than 3 standard deviations from the mean is an outlier. Or you could apply what is known as the IQR rule, the interquartile range rule. And by doing so, what you're saying is that values that are 1.5 times the IQR below the first quartile or 1.5 times the IQR above the third quartile are outliers. Or you could draw a box plot or a histogram, to see where how your data points fall, and from there see where your unusually high and low values are. And of course, you could combine any of these with your industry knowledge to determine whether a value is impossible or whether it is possible but just very highly unusual. Okay, so how do we visualize how do we identify our outliers using a box plot and the IQR rule? Let's jump straight into it. The first thing we do is to load our data set into the environment. In this case, we have a data set from Lobster Land 2023. And in this data set, each row represents the amount of money a customer spent at Lobster Land in a day. So if we were to use a box plot to identify outliers, this is how we would do it, by calling upon Python cbon. And so then the next question is, how do we interpret this chart over here? So let's use Monday as an example. So this box over here represents the middle 50% of our data, because this first line is where where the first quartile is, and this third line over here is the third quartile. So what we're saying is that the 50% of our customers who visited Lobster Land on a Monday spent between $500 and approximately $800 at the park. This lower whisker we see is Q1 minus 1.5 times this interquartile range. This upper whisker we see over here is Q3 plus 1.5 times the interquartile range. And any data point that exceeds this whisker, this upper whisker, is represented with a circle, and the circle is the outlier. Since there are no circles below this first whisker over here, therefore there are no unusually low values. But there are many values that are above this whisker, and because they're very close to each other, that's why they form this black mass over here. So that's how we would interpret the values the distribution of the data in a box plot, and how we would identify outliers that we're using this method. Now, if we were to use the IQR method, then we would call upon np.percentile, that's numpy.percentile, calculate the threshold for Q1, Q3, and with those values, we can calculate the interquartile range. And with these three data points, we can then calculate where the lower bound is, where the whisker is, the lower whisker, and the upper bound, i.e. the upper whisker. And in this case, the upper bound is this value over here, 2,645. So so what we're saying by using this method is that any data point that is above 2645 is an outlier. So are there any outliers? Yes, there are, and it's this, and it belongs to customer ID 99. So that's how you would identify outliers using the IQR rule and a box plot.